Hello, welcome to the virtual edition of our year-round screening series, Film Independent Presents, and this Q&A for the new IFC film, Holler by Nicole Riegel. I'm Jenn Wilson, Senior Programmer with Film Independent. I want to say thanks to our wonderful screening partner, Vision Media, who makes it possible for us to do these virtual screenings for you. And now, please welcome today's guest from Holler, writer-director Nicole Riegel.
Hello.
Nicole, am I saying your name right? Is it Riegel or Riegel?
You are Riegel.
Riegel.
Good. Like the theater, but with an I.
Good. Sorry, I forgot to usually ask before we start, and I totally forgot. So let's, if you don't mind, talk about you as a filmmaker first, just because we have so many members of Film Independent that are filmmakers or aspiring filmmakers. How did you get your start in filmmaking?
My goodness. I mean, I started with still photography because I couldn't afford cameras. And the first time I tried to get in film school, I actually didn't, I was rejected. And I didn't go to public high schools or junior highs or elementary schools or a school system that had taught film and television, but we had really great photography at, nearby. And so I pivoted to black and white 35 millimeter photography. And I would show up every single day and go in the dark room and develop my own photos. And though it wasn't motion, I just used my own backyard. I used what was around me and learned what I liked, like what my eye was drawn to, and composition, and how to expose film. And I did that, and it surprisingly did carry over to motion pictures. And then I started making short films, and with no money and very little resources, and until I could maybe make some with more resources. And my shorts never, they never really went anywhere. They didn't play at festivals or anything, but that sort of wasn't my point of making them. It was to get better. It was to figure out what I liked and to watch films and see who influenced me, what I accepted, what I rejected, and to find my voice in shorts. And then it, and I'm really giving the short version of a 10-year journey. And then I wrote a lot of scripts, and I think by the time I moved to Los Angeles after film school, I was writing scripts that were really expensive, that I could never get off the ground, like $20 million movies. And I was being asked to give those scripts to more established directors, male directors specifically. And I didn't want to, and I really, really just did not have anyone who believed in me as a filmmaker. And I thought, I need to change my path a bit and how I'm planning to make a movie. I need to make it cheap. I don't have a family I can call for $1 million for my movie. I need to figure out how to use what I have access to. And I know film. I love actual celluloid. And that's what I learned on. And I also came from, a school that was run by Julia Reichert and Steve Bognar. And so it was a very heavy documentary program, and learning about labor movements. And, it's a very activist kind of filmmaking program that they run. And so that's where I think a lot of the political sort of undertones of Holler come from, that background. And so I took all of that and just said, I need to make things cheaper, essentially. I need to figure out, how do I make films with what I have? And it meant going back home. It meant going back to my own backyard and figuring out what's the story that I just have to really tell, that I know how to make and no one else can make, and the film that no one will ask me to give away to another director. And I had to really bet on myself. And I wanted to tell the story of my own pursuit of an education and leaving one's home, and why was that so uniquely hard for me as a young girl from Appalachia, And at the same time, I was also looking around, living in Los Angeles and looking around at these big like studio films that were about Appalachia, films that I could never get hired on. And, you know, growing up, I was so used to people coming to Appalachia and telling our story, and us not as a community, not getting to be a part of our story. And we already get lots of negative press in Appalachia. We're already a very misunderstood part of the country. And it just all clicked for me. I was like, here's a film that I can make. I absolutely understand my own community. It's my own life. And I have resources. I can call people on the ground there. Like, in a way, not having money and having to make it in this scrappy way was sort of easy for me in some ways.
So when I'm really old, and when I first got into watching American independent films, a lot of them were like this. So when I put this film on, it was so reminiscent of so many American indies that I had seen, you know, like in the 90s or early 2000s.
Yes.
Were you inspired by some of those films too, like Kelly Reichardt's films, or even like some of Sean Baker's, or
I mean, I've always been so influenced actually by a lot of British working class films. And I love all of those filmmakers you just mentioned. But when it comes to American film, like, I fell in love with filmmaking from the 70s that my grandmother showed to me. And she showed me Elia Kazan film, showed me Splendor in the Grass, which is my favorite film of all time, and On the Waterfront. And I watched later this film by Barbara Loden called Wanda, which is sort of tied with the Dardenne brothers' Rosetta for my number 2 favorite film.
Okay.
And that's what I grew up watching. I found them in the libraries, and I found them like my local libraries had really amazing selection of international films, but I think I was the only one checking them out. Like, they were in those VHS cases that were flattened, and then they had the plastic sheet, and you flip through them at the libraries. And I was like the only one, and they were covered in dust, like no one had rented them. And then I worked at a movie theater and blew every paycheck on renting VHS tapes, and then the DVDs, and then the Blu-rays. I mean, just obsessively renting them. I may still owe late fees to rental places that aren't even open anymore. Like, it was just that's where I discovered all those films that my grandmother showed me, Elia Kazan films. And then I remember living in Appalachia, and I would hear about, in the school library, I would hear about those films from the 90s, and a lot of films from killer films that came out in the 90s. And I would hear about these films, and like Good Will Hunting was one I remember that reached my hometown, and I watched and felt very influenced by that film too. But by the time, I feel like in many ways, by the time I got to make Holler, the independent filmmaking scene, the festival scene has sort of changed. And in ways, it's splashier and more provocative in what you have to do with your first film. And Holler's not provocative or sexy in the same sense of, in the same sense. It does feel like a throwback to those films because those films those American dramas from the 70s, those British working class films like Lindsay Anderson, Ken Loach, Andrea Arnold, and then the American indies from the 90s, were my influences. But I just feel like in a lot of ways I happened, I don't know, at the wrong time, or arguably the right time as a filmmaker, but definitely not the filmmaker who's in vogue.
Right. I was going to ask if that first shot, when I turned the movie on, I was like, oh, this first shot feels like Rosetta. Was that your homage to Rosetta?
It was. And I think it's just such a beautiful film. I'm getting ready to write a piece about that film. I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's so beautiful. Just her need, her absolute, like Rosetta's absolute need to work at the waffle stand, to persevere, to survive, like there is great drama in that. Like I was in this conversation with Deborah Granick about social realism, and we talked about how those with social realism, there is a great need there. There is great drama in it, and how a character's need, their absolute need for their station in life can be entertaining. And it is very dramatic and real. And in Rosetta, I mean, there's the scene where when he's circling her with the motorcycle, and she's just been running in those long takes, and you just feel her absolute burning desire to survive. And I remember feeling that way as a young girl in Appalachia. And with Ruth, it totally inspired that. I love that film so much. I hope I can write something about it and more people will rediscover that film.
Yeah, I grew up in an extremely small town too, in Southern Illinois, and I just spent 9 months there. And I don't think it's doing as poorly there as what it was, but there's still a lot of poverty there. And when I would see movies that reminded me of that place, it used to make me feel incredibly down. And I used to feel like I had a hard time processing those. But your film didn't make me feel that way. Yeah. Because I feel like it didn't leave us in a place of there's nothing that these people can do about this. They're stuck in it, and they are just on a treadmill of life, and they can't. Do you want to talk about, I noticed that Pamela Adlon's character, it's revealed by her friend from the factory that because her daughter says something about her being a loser. Ruth says something about her being a junkie. And her friend says she was fine until that doctor prescribed her all those pills. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about how you got the idea to include America's opioid epidemic in the story?
Yeah. No, thank you for asking about that. I was conflicted, to include that or not, because my home is so conflicted and we're so sensitive, rightly so, about talking about the opioid epidemic in this country, because it's all we're known for. When people think about where I'm from, they think about opioids, they think about addictions, but the way we talk about it in the media, it's as if we're blaming these towns for it. Like, don't go there, it's a bad place, it's just opioids. And I wanted to touch on it. I had to touch on it. To not touch on it wouldn't be, it would be glossed over. It wouldn't be authentic to the story, but to do it in a way where the blame is put on the right people. And I think that's kind of what's missing. We see these like super big, over the top, dramatic, like performances and overtures about the opioid epidemic. And it's done in a way that just makes people there look kind of a little unhinged. And it just looks like a place you don't want to go. And it was so important to show smart people living in Appalachia who have a total understanding, as Linda does, a total understanding of why essentially drugs have been dumped in their region, and why that region's been exploited, and that the people who are responsible for it maybe don't wear hairnets, but they wear suits. And to show that those people are not stupid hillbillies, but they have an awareness of that. They're smart and they know what's being done. But I think someone like Ruth doesn't know that, because when you're 17, you can't always see the institutions that are trapping you, as I didn't at 17. I see them now, and I see them now as a grown woman, but I didn't see them at 17.
Yeah, I think this movie really made me think about, just like Julia and Stephen's films do, they make you think about the exploitation of American workers. So when I would see these movies before, they were always about, the factories are, these Rust Belt factories are leaving, and that's the problem. But actually dealing with the fact that these factories were not only giving, but they were taking.
Mhm.
And from people, you know, like that character who were injured. She was injured and obviously not taken care of in a good way by the industry that she got injured working for.
Yes.
Talk about your casting in this. I thought your cast was fantastic.
Thank you.
Your brother and sister roles, they're so fantastic because they're so bonded, but they also still have that brother and sister, like, you're annoying, I hate you, get away from me.
Yes.
Talk about casting that.
Yeah. I mean, casting, I didn't want to cast someone who was really famous. Like, it's okay if you could recognize them, but I didn't want a movie star in the role. And I mean, that makes it a challenging film to make for other, more bureaucratic reasons. But I wanted to find someone who could carry that role. I did think about maybe casting it in the town like a lot of the other roles, but there were some performances where I really needed a performance. And Jessica was not someone who was on my radar, and I was casting all over the world. I was getting tapes from all over the world. I was had big casting sessions going in New York and Los Angeles and all throughout the country. And I received a call about her, and the show Into the Effing World was I think had just come out. And they asked if she'd have lunch with me, and auditions were the next day. And I had lunch with her, and I didn't know that she came from a sort of similar working class background in England. And we really bonded over how it was a point of shame for both of us, how class is something in Hollywood we don't talk about, and how I think as artists we don't want to talk about it because we risk being sort of outcast in the industry. We risk being, I think for her as an actor, being very pigeonholed and playing a working class role. And we really bonded over that because I don't think we'd ever talked to other people about that before. That point of shame about where you come from and how those like sort of scars of an impoverished childhood, like they stay with you as an adult. You don't outgrow them. You grow to understand them. And I felt like she's going to understand the nuances of this film, and I can take her to this location, and she will. It's a very physical role. She will embrace that, and that was important. Not a lot of actors, they'll say they want to do it, but actually being there on a polar vortex and handling frozen metal and power tools and working the way I want you to work as an actor in a totally immersive way, and with first timers, as I call them, because they're SAG members now. It can look fun on the outside, and it is fun, but you have to be pretty down. You have to be really down to and love it to work that way. And she was. And she also auditioned, and she walked in and like put the script down and just completely improv'd her audition, and I loved it. She somehow tracked down my email address and sent me this. Found out I loved Andrea Arnold and sent me a film she was in and said, I give a very Andrea Arnold performance in this and you should watch it. She was just so tenacious and pushy, and I loved it. And I just sort of loved her. Her being was already like Ruth. Like Ruth would do all of that. And then for the rest of the cast, Becky, I've always been a fan of, but I'd never really seen her in a this kind of dramatic performance before, but I saw her in this play called Cardinal in New York with Anna Chlumsky, and I just happened to be in New York for auditions that week, and Paul Feig, who's an executive producer on the film, I called him and I said, could you send the script to Becky Ann Baker? And he did, and she read it in like a day and said yes, and loves working with new directors, which is also rare. And similar with Pam Adlon, we were on the ground. An actor fell through a week before filming, sent Pam the script, and she read it overnight and got on the phone with me and said yes, and just wanted to support rising talent. And then a lot, and the brother, Gus Halper, I found out of the New York auditions. And then Austin Emilio, my casting directors called me about him. I still have never seen The Walking Dead. And I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to see someone as a zombie. And then, I didn't feel like that would be the appropriate way to be introduced to him for that role. And they sent me a 45-minute YouTube video of him talking about his life as a professional skateboarder, because that's what he used to do before acting. And he was just so hard. And we sent him the script, and I cast him based off of that YouTube video. And then everyone else, it was a 2-week scout we did prior to filming, and just going in all the factories, the scrapyards, the schools, Olive Gardens, bars, biker bars, everywhere, and finding people to play fictionalized versions of themselves.
So yeah, let's talk about scrapping, because this is not really anything that I knew about. Was scrapping in Ohio something that you already knew about? Did you happen upon this story?
Yeah. My earliest memory of it was when I was really, really little, and my grandparents would take me to the scrapyard that's in the film, and to sell like recycling and scrap metal and I was like, why are we doing this? And they're like, oh, for money. And it's just sort of baked into the DNA of the town. Now, we weren't doing it on the large scale, for like way that is done in the film, but it's so baked into the DNA of the town that places are scrapped. And a lot of the places that are featured in the film, like the abandoned school, the place where, Pudge is killed, which is a big storage warehouse now. We had to put metal back in those places because they'd already been scrapped by the time we filmed. And, the film shows a small portion of a small town viewpoint of the scrap metal industry. But I mean, it is a massive billion-dollar industry. It truly is. And I mean, it's like, you could look at Detroit, you could look at places like Buffalo, New York. It really is something that, affects these towns, and it does stimulate them, but it is a bit of an underground economy. It's illegal and it's legal. It's a complicated answer. But all that metal, that they're scrapping and selling overseas to China is melted down, and it's turned into all the products that we Americans use today. Like, I'm on my laptop talking to you right now, and the laptops and phones we're on right now, these parts probably started in a junkyard, is the truth. And the fact that when automation comes in and when all of these jobs are gone, some of these towns do have to look at what is left behind, and it was something that I knew a lot about. I learned more about while making the film, but something that we weren't talking about. And I also thought it was such a fascinating economy, because it also mirrors how those people in my community feel. They feel left behind. And now they're profiting off of what is left behind.
It's so weird because, the selling off of America to China and Hong Kong becomes like a metaphor in the film, like, or sort of the bigger thought is, what are we really selling off, or what have we already really sold off to them? And this feeling like, oh, China's, taking our place. They're much more prosperous than us. But it's strange because I watched Holler, and then I watched a brand new documentary right after about China's industry. And, some of those jobs, the starting pay is like $350.
Yeah.
Like the US dollar equivalent would be like $350. So it's like, yeah, the workers there have our jobs, but they're not necessarily doing better.
Yeah.
Because this exploitation is everywhere,
Yeah.
But I just thought that was crazy to like watch your movie and then see the other side of it. And in China and like what's going on there and what it means that their economy and the industry has sped up.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And that, there were, it's interesting because there's also parts of towns like the one where I'm from where there is some wealth in those towns. And even within the bubble of those towns, they don't always see this world. They don't even see this happening in their own backyard. And it's just the class divide is so great. And I think when you accumulate more money, or if you're born into money, whatever, however you have some money, to watch people in Holler, to watch some of those characters, to watch these communities, to have the discussion we're having right now, I think it makes people uncomfortable because it reminds us that it's not a meritocracy. But we need to see these communities. What was most surprising to me was not that people at large in the country are surprised by scrapping, that the scrapping world is surprising to them, but the people who actually live in Jackson, Ohio, there are parts of that 6,000 person town that were surprised by it. That's
really
a different kind of divide. Yeah. We're like, wait, this isn't my town. And it's like, this is part of your town.
Yeah. It's interesting to be like, because I have felt that way about where I have come from too, is definitely being blind to things that were going on that I see now. But I feel that way about every place that I've lived. I feel that way about Chicago too.
Yeah.
When all the shooting, gun violence that's been going on in Chicago, it sort of made me feel like I didn't understand, because I lived there 11 years, that I didn't understand that place. And I was just like, no, I just didn't see so much of what was going on in that city.
Yeah, it's hard. Like that stuff's really, you're right about no matter where you live, it's hard to look at. And I think that's what, in making Holler something I put a lot of thought into before making the film, where I was like, this has to be, it can't be that old phrase people like to use, poverty porn.
Right.
I have such disdain for that phrase, because when you show me really lavish, wealthy, sexy, provocative material, I don't say, oh, you're showing me rich porn. Like, I don't say that. It isn't really a two-way street. And so I was like, I want to show the heart and the warmth and the levity of my town. And through a character like Linda, who I look at as like a lower middle class woman who works at that factory, gets a 2-week vacation, has a pension, but she's still hurting. She's not hurting economically because the factory closes, but she has lost community because the factory closes. And at 55, it's easy to tell a 55-year-old woman, like, just go learn a new green energy job, just learn that. And a character like Linda wouldn't be opposed to that, but that's easier said than done. Like, at that age, do you want to go to school or trade school and learn something else entirely and change the course of your life at 55, when you've punched in every day and, seen the same faces? And it was important to bring a warmth and a humanity to these things, because I was very cognizant, and still am very sensitive to people writing Holler off as bleak poverty porn, because I don't think that's the film I made.
I don't think so either. I don't think it's bleak poverty porn. I meant to ask a question about Pam Adlon's character. She doesn't want to go to rehab. She keeps having these conversations with her kids. They keep trying to get her into rehab. She doesn't want to go. What is that about for her?
Yeah, I think it's, she doesn't want to go. She doesn't want to leave home. And it's like, yeah, she probably should go to a clinic or Florida. And a lot of the clinics, in that town, like in Chillicothe, Ohio, which is a neighboring community about 20 minutes from Jackson, Ohio, a lot of those clinics are full. So you outsource to places in Florida. They have to have somewhere else to send you because they're full. And one thing that a lot of clinics have done is set up places in county jails for people to go temporarily because they're full. But for me, it was about her not wanting to leave home, her not wanting to leave the county. There are so many people who've never left Jackson, Ohio. Like growing up, I mean, I remember going to Kentucky and it was like I was going to Mars or something. Like that's still there, not wanting to leave one's own backyard, not wanting to leave your comfort. That's deeply entrenched in where I come from. Even if it's better for you, there's just this fear of the unknown.
Chillicothe, I've seen a lot about Chillicothe, and it's because they unfortunately have a huge missing and murdered women problem in Chillicothe. A lot of people women have gone missing or been murdered, and it's at least partly to do with the opioid epidemic. Mm-hmm. I believe there's a Chillicothe in Illinois too. I think many states have a Chillicothe. Really?
And I love that you pronounced it correctly too. Yeah. Nobody ever gets it.
Chillicothe. All right, let's see what we have questions from our watchers today. I loved the film. Were you able to see it in a theater with the audience?
I was a couple times, not on the festival circuit, unfortunately, but I saw it at the Majestic, which is an art house independent theater in Chillicothe, Ohio. And it's the only remaining theater in that town. And they were closed because they had no revenue early on in the early months of the pandemic. And so we arranged, I worked with IFC. IFC was like, thank you, IFC, if you're listening, allowed me to host a series of private screenings to just raise enough money to pay the Majestic's employees so they could continue to just, stay open a little bit longer. So we did that. And the first time I ever watched Holler with an audience was with my hometown. So it all worked out. And then I watched it this opening weekend in Pasadena.
Awesome. At the Limleys, right?
Yeah. I also went to Santa Monica. I went twice over the weekend.
Jonathan says, what did you learn the most from making the film, and what experiences will stay with you forever? I enjoyed the film.
Thank you. What did I love the most? I loved shooting the opening scene the most, the opening scene of the film, because that was like my first image of the film before I even wrote the script. And I remember it started to snow. It was exciting. Everyone was happy on the set that day. And it was the first thing we rolled camera on was the opening. And it was this cathartic moment where that image was out of my mind. I'd carried it for 4 years at that point, and it was out of my mind. It existed on film, and I felt emotionally and physically at rest. And then what I learned, I think I learned more about the relationship between like taking people who were non-professional actors at the time, the coming actors, and putting them with seasoned people. And that in that process, I sort of had to let the other actors be like co-directors in the scenes. Like I had an idea in my mind of how it would work, but it sort of kept not working. And then I had to very quickly figure out how do I make this work? And it was more about using Becky Ann Baker is fantastic at it. Talking about what the story points are that are important to her and letting everything else go. And as long as she hits those in the scenes and can guide all of these first time actors in the scene, then it worked. But figuring out that dance took me a while.
So first off, the film's playing now in LA at the Limleys.
Mhm.
Is it at a couple of different Limleys or just the Pasadena?
It's in Santa Monica at the
Okay.
Monica Center too, and Pasadena.
And then did you have a virtual release yet? Or
Yeah, it's also available in so many places on demand.
okay, cool. I didn't know if you had done both the theatrical and the virtual at the same time, or if you were waiting. But you were saying something before we got on the interview about people coming to see your film, and all of us sort of as a community, as a film community, whatever we do in the film community, supporting theatrical, which I thought was really valid. Can you talk about what you were saying about supporting theatrical?
Yeah, I think, a lot of my conversations I have within the film community is, about wanting movies to come back, movie theaters to come back. And we all want our movies to play at theaters and how we miss them. And we're having this conversation, but we have to show up. I don't think as filmmakers, we can demand for movie theaters to come back, but not attend movies in movie theaters. I think if I, as a filmmaker, am saying I want movie theaters to come back, and all I'm doing is renting your movie on VOD, I don't have a right to complain about movie theaters coming back. I have to get in my car and I got to drive to Pasadena and go do it. Or I have to, walk to my neighborhood theater, wherever it's playing. Like we have to show up and go do that and really stop and think about what it is we're complaining about and saying that we want. We have to show up, and we can't just show up for our own movies. We have to show up for each other's movies, and it's not a competition. It's a community. It's about us as a filmmaking community, keeping these films alive. We're actually a very small community in the grand scheme of the world, and so it always kind of baffles me how competitive the independent filmmaking scene can be when we really just need to show up and support the things we like because they're so hard to make. I now, I think try to go see a movie every week or a couple movies every week, or watch a movie every day, even if it's not in a movie theater. It's just really important.
I'm guilty of the same thing. Because I want to see In the Heights, and then I found out it's on HBO Max. I'll just watch it on HBO Max.
Yeah.
And then my friends came over the other day and were like, "You're not going to go see it in the theater? Like, you need to go see it in the theater." And I was like, "Oh, you're right." So we're all going to see it in the theater, on the weekends. And I was like,
I'm going to do the same.
True. I need to make a conscious effort to get back in. I'll tell the truth. My favorite theaters to go to were ArcLight. So I live 15 minutes from ArcLight Hollywood. It was my spot. Yeah. So, but I like the Limleys too. I can go back to the Limleys. I like them a lot. They play a lot of great stuff. So I'm so glad Limleys survived it.
Yeah, same. Landmark is one. Landmark on Pico.
I really love Landmark. Yes,
that's a good one. The Lamley, it needs some touch ups, but the Lamley Royal Theater has goobers, and it's it's across from New Art, which also has goobers. Yeah. And it's rare to find the goobers around, and it's my favorite movie theater.
Goobers. I go to the Royal all the time. They have fabulous new seats in there. They're like fancy. And I go to the New Art a lot too. If I want to see an incredibly super duper long Russian film, I always see that at the New Art.
Yes. And there are films, I watch on VOD, and I have fun watching things at home. I just think that a ticket, not to sound like too sappy or almighty here and get too much on my soapbox, but when you buy a ticket, it's your vote. You're saying, I want to be at this theater. I want to watch this. That's what it is. And when you think of it like that, doesn't mean you have to go to the movie theater every day and spend that $8 to $14, but just being cognizant of the community we're in and what we're asking for.
Well, this was such a fun conversation. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for joining. Thank you so much for Holler. I wish you the best of luck with it. It's so fantastic. And come back and talk to us next time.
I will.
Next time you make another fabulous movie.
I will. Oh, I hope so. I will. Thank you for having me. Thanks for all the work that you do at Film Independent.